I know that you used to be a musician. I was like Googling and researching you, and I was watching your old violin videos on YouTube from your from your old YouTube channels from like, are you like 18, 17 at that time?
Yeah, good guess. I was 17. Yeah, around 17.
It looks very cool. I mean, classical music, you're playing classical music on the violin, you're sort of dressed very formal, and it's like a concert area. There's orchestra and everything. It's kind of a formal, in a way, almost like luxurious experience, I guess, for the audience as well.
For sure.
And I
Yeah.
was immediately thinking about like how that translates to what you're doing now, which again, like you're creating these luxurious aesthetic experiences.
Yeah, it always came back around in terms of I was classically trained right on the violin when I was 11, 10 or 11 I started.
Yeah, I have a ton of questions for you, man. Like I think so far, you're one of like the most exciting guests on this podcast because you're doing something that's very aesthetic, like a lot of different disciplines at the same time, and a lot of like very strong foundation in visual design and aesthetics. But before I get to the questions, I should do the intro.
Yeah.
So here's the intro. This is the Design Discipline Podcast. My name is Baitash. Today, I'm speaking with Andres Jasso. Andres is a designer and creative director based in San Antonio in Texas. He has practiced for more than 12 years and experienced multiple success stories in his career, including tenure at 2 technology startups that got acquired. That means winning the game among startup founders. This means actually in monetary terms, his work has contributed to over $200 million in business value. And of course, he's made a couple of million himself. Currently, Andres is running multiple ventures, all sharing a foundation of design. He is the founder and creative director at All Hands. This is a design studio that continues his practice of leading visual identity and product design. He also runs Safe House. It's a luxury membership lounge in San Antonio. And finally, he's created Oak and Saint, a coffee shop and wine bar. So, Andres, welcome. I hope that was reasonably accurate.
Yes,
Is
that
there
was.
anything else we should know about you before we proceed?
I always have something else up my sleeve. I'm sure. I'm honored to be asked on the podcast. Yeah.
Thank you. Tell me about the day that you discovered that design is a job.
Oh, that's a good question. The day that I discovered design as a job, yeah, it probably was. It was during my violin phase. When I was practicing violin, and my during my high school for my high school graduation, my mother essentially said I needed to do a project, and the project was to do a solo violin album. And during that time, I got into design. My brother was a self-taught engineer, and he said, "Hey, you should download Photoshop. That's how you're going to be able to design, the cover for your album and everything." And I remember just Google searching, right? Google searching Photoshop, downloading Photoshop, going through the dimensions, like what's the dimension, right? I learned about like one-to-one ratio, square, And so I get into Photoshop, download it. We did a little photo shoot. We go through all of that. And then from there, I realized, oh, this is graphic design, I guess. Like you could create visuals on the laptop, on your computer. And then, from there, kind of just went into some logo design, some graphics. And I remember my first project was a logo, and I believe I charged $50 for it. And I really thought that was expensive. And I was like very new, right? And I mean, I think I spent weeks on this, like one project, going through multiple iterations, and all I got out of it was like $50. Yeah, then I realized, oh, okay, this is like a service. I could sell visuals, right? And that kind of opened the door for, design it can be a job. It can be a career path.
You mentioned your brother is a self-taught engineer and you're a self-taught designer, right? So, and I think we talked about this before where you mentioned an unconventional kind of upbringing and schooling and education. Can you tell us about that? How you were kind of educated generally in your childhood?
Yeah, so I tell this to people all the time that I was amongst a lot of families in Texas, right, in San Antonio that were homeschooled, and I would be considered homeschooled. However, I tell people that I'm unschooled because I have friends that that the school system was definitely like a school structure, right? An education structure was brought into the household. But for me, that was not the case. Like a lot of my upbringing was, as far as I can remember, was, just waking up, my mom asking us what we wanted to do, how we felt that day. And we, of course, every day we just wanted to play outside, play on the trampoline. And she would just allow that, right? She would always allow kind of for us to expel our energy first. And so we would go outside, play, do whatever we wanted to. And then we would come back in and she would have, like, let's say canvases, and she would paint. So my mom's a painter. She's an artist. So it was very unconventional, super unconventional. She would just have us, we would do projects, right? So that was very what our like education was. It was always like hands-on projects. Even if it had to do with history, I remember we would cut out characters in history. Let's say we were always stuck in like ancient Egypt and Rome and Greece, and so we would do a timeline, right? So it would be very hands-on. We would like cut out these like characters and like put them on this like book. So we had like these massive books that we'd create so that like history and like timeline was like solidified in our minds.
Wow. And this is like fascinating to me because I'm like coming to the age where I'm considering children, and I'm of course thinking about like how do I educate these people?
Yeah. These small humans.
Yeah, and I've been in education for a long time. I was at the university, I was leading research and teaching at the university. I've taught at vocational schools, and I've been to some interesting schools myself when I was growing up, and it's staggering, like the difference between like a really well thought out education for people versus just a standard or sort of average thing that you get can lead to completely different lives. It's really sort of massive difference in the life that you lead afterwards.
Yeah, I would put it on my mom in that we didn't really have another choice. Like that's how she brought us, right? That's how she like that was my upbringing, right? That's how she taught us, and I think that's how her mother taught her as well. Extremely unconventional, very hands-on, very much the mindset of if you can't use the knowledge that you're learning, if you can't adapt, like put that into effect, then that knowledge in your brain is useless. And so that's how it was like all the knowledge that you have in your whatever you're learning, to use it just reinforces, right? Just reinforces that knowledge. So.
That's really cool. I really love learning things. I have been in school traditionally, but I still have the love of learning and reading and doing things has not been squeezed out of me. But I was fortunate to go to good schools where I could still enjoy it. And it's just very interesting because at the same time, it sounds like you start from a place of advantage when you go into life and the human adult life that we're living now, because you've been allowed to explore certain things at such depth. I imagine like art and design, which you sort of got into, and then even music, and also you've done a lot of business later. But also it sounds like a disadvantage in a way, being like going through such a different system. What was some of the disadvantages that you experienced when you got into like adult life after this kind of schooling or unschooling?
Yeah, unschooling. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the disadvantage is a bit more like you are going against the grain. I think that there's a certain level of threshold, I think, that you pass, like especially in your teenage years, where you decide, am I going to continue, right, in the way that my parents taught me, or am I going to kind of follow the crowd? Of course, the advantage there was, I was able to see the advantage, but you kind of have to hide in plain sight a little bit because, you kind of have to, there's areas in life, of course, socially, right, where you have to adapt, right? You have to kind of be like everyone else. But I think there's areas where it's like, there's a lot of questioning, right? Especially when it comes to business. And then even more so when it comes to design, like coming from a design and art background, getting into business, my method to create business is through art first. And that's not very common, right? And so I'd rather create art to see if I have a business to optimize and scale versus write out a business plan that I think will like dilute the art form of what I'm trying to create. right?
That's very interesting. I, of course, have, questions for you, but this is something so interesting. I just want to dive into straight away. Like, can you give an example of what it is like to create business starting with art?
So I guess the best example I can give right now is Safe House. And with Safe House, it's quite a unique opportunity, specifically in San Antonio, when it comes to these like elevated membership houses.
So this is one of the ventures, one of the businesses you're running right now.
Yes,
it's a club,
that's right.
basically, right? Or a place. It's a location, right? Also,
it's a physical location. Yeah, it's a lounge. And Oak and Saint, the coffee shop, is actually in the front space. So the whole space is 4,000 square feet.
Is that where you are right now?
No, I'm actually across from it, so I can just walk over to the concept. That was designed. That was intentional. Can't get too far away from work,
But it looks like the same kind of design. That isn't like the interior design of the both places. I guess, is that something? Was it just like you arrived there and it was like this in that neighborhood, or did you intentionally design every single aspect of the interior and the objects and everything in these spaces?
Yeah, most of it's designed by myself. These spaces are warehouse spaces, like they're industrial warehouse spaces. So the shell of them, is quite conducive for this type of look, this like aesthetic. Yeah.
But let's get back to Safe House. We can talk about aesthetics later. I do want to talk about it, but we can keep it on track.
Yeah, so Safe House, I think, is quite the art form type of business in that, there was an opportunity in San Antonio to create something that was missing for a place like San Antonio. San Antonio is very much, I tell this to our members and potential members and friends, that San Antonio is like the speakeasy of Texas. If you know, you know. If you don't, it kind of just looks like a garbage dump. Like you don't really know what's going on here, and you think that there's not many. It's unsure, right? It's not very cool, right? It's not. We're not necessarily considered the cool city in Texas.
Yeah, you don't hear about San Antonio much. You hear about Austin. You hear about Dallas.
Totally, yeah. You hear about Austin, Dallas. You may hear about Houston, right? And those are really big cities. Austin, for example, it's a young city for one, and two, there's a lot of cultural diversity there, right? There's a lot of California transplants, right? San Antonio is a bit stubborn in that there's a lot of the culture of San Antonio is a bit more Mexican. The heritage is older, and there's still a lot of diversity in San Antonio, but it's not. It's more. My mom likes to say, "Es un rancho grande." It's a big ranch, right? And so the way that it works here is it's very spread out, right? And so the design of the city is very spread out, and it's almost as if there's different neighborhoods that are like these different ranches of people that maybe don't hang out, maybe don't connect as much, and that's more so because of the design, I think, of the city. And so so there was a unique opportunity for Safe House, right? And so it was this, it was risky to build a business like this, in that it's not very concentrated like Austin. Austin, you can find this demographic. Pretty quickly in one centralized area. In San Antonio, you kind of have to call them and see if they'll show up, see if they'll come out of hiding, right? So that was kind of like that piece of it. So from a business perspective, getting back to that question, the business strategy now is working because we found the people first, and that is not a good business strategy, right? Like people are unique, right? And so if I were to build a business strategy and try to build the criteria for the types of, we call sticky members, right? We have members that are very loyal, and we have like a group of them. And we call them, those are ambassadors now. At Safe House, we've made them, given them a title. But to find those people, each one of them is so unique, and they nurture the community in very different ways. That's not if I were to start this over and create a business plan, it just would, I would be trying to come up with maybe things that don't exist. I wouldn't know until I found it out first, which is why I like to visualize the potential, right, of a business before throwing numbers at a wall and saying, oh, this could work because the numbers work. But that's not how life works, right? Life is art. Life is design, right? And so the business plan can fail, and you'd be like quite disappointed. But instead, I'd like to have something tangible first and then optimize. Yeah.
I love that idea. I did a version of this recently where I'm actually wearing it right now. So I'm wearing a hoodie that says design engineer, and I made this hoodie. This is the prototype, and we're shooting photos with it now. And this is something I'm offering to a private group of members. And the story of this was that I am a design engineer. I've been for many years, even before it became a thing in tech. And I just really love it. It's, I think, my calling in life to do this. I'm just feeling so blessed to be doing this. And I wanted to, now that it's becoming known, it became a meme, I just wanted to create a brand around it. I bought a domain, designengineer.ing. I just put it in a font, which is like one of the most fashionable fonts right now, sort of like this narrow kind of serif, and just threw like a stock graphic on it and started posting these pictures of different objects. A hoodie was one of them, but other ideas like notebook, just, apps, whatever, just throwing out different prototypes, just imagination, like conceptual artworks of this brand existing in the world, and made a little website, and more than 600 people have signed up so far.
Let's go. That's sick.
Yeah. So I send them a mailing list. I send them an email every now and then and give them update on this project. So now they can all see the hoodie has been done. But the point is that when I created the visual brand and the concept for this brand, I didn't know that this was going to be the product. This became the product because this was the visual, is one of the concepts that they responded the most to. It went viral on Twitter. And so, okay, yeah, I guess it's the hoodie. You have spoken.
Yeah. This is why I love like gaining data through design. Yeah. So like there's that like 0 to 1. There's like this aspect of, this is why I think purely business minded individuals, let's say like versus design minded individuals, sometimes have a hard time communicating, right? Because it's two different ends of the spectrum, right? Where you have design is actually creating the data, but it's very unknown. And so it's very risky, right? You're trying to create something to then have the data to then optimize, right? And scale. And it could fail, but like, hey, maybe design it first, like create first and then see if you have something. Yeah.
Yeah, at this level, if we're talking about like design as an instrument of business strategy of validating ideas, I think it creates data and creates demand at the same time. Like the demand is the data, I guess. So if you're not getting those signups, if you're not getting those like pre-orders through the brand, the initial sort of design presentation, then that's not the design.
Well, we see a lot of this with fashion too, right? And we're seeing a lot of it now, right? Where, that is kind of like the way to do it, where you gain your audience through like a drop and you have a small capsule collection,
In a way, like this is actually, if you look at like design consultants like Design Thinking and this and that, they also do a variation of this where they, use prototypes and do user studies and things like that. But less known and less popular is like the act of, as you said, putting something with an artistic intention, with some aesthetic, some kind of brand intention out there, and the aesthetic becomes like your prototype. Are people drawn to this aesthetic? Are people drawn to this name or this intention? And if they are, then you just look at what they want and deliver the things that they might pay for. That's, I think, a brilliant strategy. Tell me about, now that we're into like strategy and aesthetics and things like that, I saw a word on your profile, which was really interesting. I'd never seen that before. Omotenashi, Japanese word, right? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, omotenashi. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Omotenashi. Yeah. What is omotenashi, and how does it exist in your work?
So I guess I'll have to kind of give that some context and like where that, like why that is even a part of really like any of my work. But it is very much attached to the concept of the Okensen concept for the coffee shop. So there was a market opportunity, and when I was in San Francisco, I traveled a lot while I was living there for 3 years. I traveled to Norway, I traveled to Berlin, Japan, and I noticed the coffee shops in these other countries, and Europe especially as well. It was very experiential. and it wasn't just about the product. So I started doing some research on it, and I realized that there's a whole history of coffee waves. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the waves of coffee, but
Vaguely. Are we in the fourth wave right now? The last I checked, it was third wave. Third wave is after Starbucks, right?
right, third wave is after third wave is Starbucks.
Okay.
But
What are the first two waves?
so the first two waves. So this was good. So the first wave I learned was the first wave is everyone gets coffee in the household. So it's Folgers, right? So like just instant coffee, right? Obviously, it tastes terrible, right? We don't like that kind of coffee right now. But first wave coffee, that's Folgers. Second wave coffee is, okay, let's say more people get that coffee, but it's going to be like a chain. So that would be like, let's say Dunkin' Donuts. It's just like a black drip, right? And so that was a bit more distributed, but it's like a chain. Third wave coffee was Starbucks. Let's actually make it a bit more premium. Let's have some more options. Let's like care about the product a bit more, but it's still a chain. Right, so the service is, let's say, drive-through. It's a chain. It's a lot more people get this coffee. Fourth wave coffee was a reaction to Starbucks, and fourth wave coffee is hipster coffee. And fourth wave coffee is essentially, I care so much about the product. I'm so obsessed about coffee that I don't care about service at all. And so this is where you get, mean baristas. Right.
Yeah. Okay. I get it. Yeah.
And so it's like obsession over the craft only. Right. It's like, I don't want to say good morning to you. I don't really care. But I'm not going to give you, right? You come in, I'm going to give you a craft coffee. It's going to take me 10 minutes to make this coffee.
It's like the soup Nazi in Seinfeld.
Yeah.
If you annoy the guy, you're bad, and you don't get the soup.
Yeah. So that's fourth wave. Fifth wave coffee is the newest wave, which is essentially it's begging the question, why can't we have obsession over the craft and obsession over the service and space? And so omotenashi, a lot of coffee shops in Japan, they have a lot of this, right? You walk in and it feels like a tea ceremony where you're very welcome. It's very welcoming, right? And the craft is still there as well. And so you can see how, this, like, of course, for places like San Antonio, there's nothing like this. And so the omotenashi aspect for the coffee shop, it came from this reaction of looking at the landscape of San Antonio and seeing that we have a lot of fourth wave coffee, and a lot of the amazing coffee that we have, they're actually coming from trucks, from like small, you walk up to the truck and you just grab a coffee. And one, I think it's because it's cost effective. But two, it's about the obsession over the craft of the coffee and not so much the space, environment, and service, right? And so with Okansen, omotenashi hospitality kind of was born, right? Where it was like, well, why can't we have both? And it also shows, if you go to, let's say, like a hotel lobby, you might have a beautiful space, a beautiful interior, but how's the coffee, right? It's not going to be fourth wave obsession type of style coffee, right? And so really it's just like cohesiveness, like how can we get like all of it? So I would say Okansen in San Antonio is the only space in San Antonio. And that's another reason why it was done here, right? I think, I was living in Berlin, and this was pre-COVID, and I came back in March, and it was like quarantine time, right? So I came back before Berlin. I was living in Austin, but I come back from Berlin. I was going to move back to Austin, but I quarantined here in my old childhood room with my parents and my youngest sister. And I was there for 3 months, and just kind of, a lot of things changed. And I realized that there's a lot of potential for a city like San Antonio, where when you put a concept like this, you stand out as one of one, versus going to a major city where it's a bit more saturated,
That's so interesting. What I see of course, I'm tremendously interested in this kind of business because as a designer, like as someone who cares about aesthetics and experiences of aesthetics too, like I'm just very attracted to these kinds of places. I go to what might be considered similar, like fifth wave coffee shops and these cafes and restaurants in my area when I travel also. What I notice is that it's an extremely difficult business. So recently in my neighborhood, 2 restaurants which had a similar ethos, great service, great environment, great food, they closed down. So it's very difficult to sustain this kind of business. Can you talk about like, well, how do you even like do it? What are the things that you care about? What are the measures of a business like that so that not only, it works for a while and it satisfies your desire to be a coffee shop owner for a while, but also it becomes an actual long-term business?
Right. So there's a couple things, and this is definitely something that I'm learning as I go, as I build, right? As we all, I think, should. There's only so many things you can assume until you try it, right? And then you start to like get the feedback. But Oak and Saint. Well, first, when I was living in San Francisco, I designed the brand when I was there. So this was maybe, I don't know, more than 12 years ago, maybe 15. And a lot of the graphics, a lot of like the logo that I have actually exists today. It's the same file, which I think is fascinating because for me, I guess the way that I work is I like to create things, through art and through design to see how it's going to live in the world in a future time, even if it's not now, right? But one of the things I learned with physical concepts was, yes, it's very difficult, right? It is very difficult, but something that I tried to apply through the digital, because I came from the digital space from SaaS, right? And from like SaaS software, I was kind of trying to explore this realm where like, what are the patterns that you see in SaaS that are not being applied to physical concepts? And so one of those was kind of like this almost freemium model, right? Where like you get a peek inside a software, but then there's a curtain, there's like essentially a paywall, right, that you have to go through, but you get just enough to want more. And so with Oak and Saint, Oak and Saint's the public side coffee shop, and Oak and Saint by itself is not a amazing business necessarily, like you're mentioning. It's a feel good business. I like to walk in and it's a beautiful space and but the numbers, right, the margins, it can be rough if you're not getting enough traffic and all that, right? But the space in the front is the public side, and the space in the back is a different entity, which is Safe House, right? The space in the back is the Safe House lounge. And so the idea was Oak and Saint would be the public entry point. And if you enjoy your experience there, right, then you might enjoy even further the Safe House concept, right, which will connect you with the community even further. And the Safe House concept is a lot more sustainable because it's a subscription model, right? It's a membership model. And Oak and Saint essentially services Safe House. Oak and Saint can live on its own, but Safe House cannot live without Oak and Saint, right? Because Safe House is not a restaurant. It's not technically a wine bar. It's not a coffee shop. It's purely about a community, like purely about a core community and that access, right? And so Oak and Saint kind of is sustainable through this other premium model. Oh, like if we got no public traffic with Oak and Saint, we still have a loyalty through the membership of Safe House. So then it would just become Oak and Saint only services, that entity only services Safe House. And then maybe, if that was the case, if the public didn't enjoy Oak and Saint, which is not the case, so they do like Oak and Saint. We have, some like public loyalty with Oak and Saint. It's just more of a backup plan, right? Because Oak and Saint, like a coffee shop model, is just different. It's a different business model than Safe House. But it's a bit more of a playground with Oak and Saint, which is nice. It's a nice playground, right, for that. However, I will say that there are some things that I'm doing slightly differently with, I think, hospitality in general, with our staff, in that because we're so small right now, and I would want to continue this, I think, through other locations, but we are making our staff partners as well. So it actually takes us quite a bit of time to find the right staff. But when we do, we make them partners.
So another practice from the tech industry where you give them like actual equity?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
So
that's really cool.
Yeah, because of that, there's a lot more weight that staff members take because they want to show up, right? And that's super important because there's so many things, right? Hey, we run out of coffee. A staff partner, they don't come in and clock in. They go grab the coffee, they bring it. They know the weight of that, right? It's similar to tech, right? I mean, when I was in San Francisco, right, I'm there for hours, right, working, putting in the equity, like building, right? And because we're so small, they see they don't get lost in a large team. They see the work that they put in and the results that they get from it. So
That's fascinating. That might be like the hack that every restaurant business needs. I'm imagining, like, if we talk like 5 or 10 years from now, I'm imagining you are going to be just like this famous restaurateur with like, chains, tens of different, like hundreds of shops and things like that. I think that you have a potential to go there maybe with this kind of thinking. What I see in this business, actually, now that I think about it, it's very interesting because when I think about the sort of these highly designed, highly experiential, aesthetic restaurants and cafes and things like that actually work well as businesses, most of them have founders who are very involved with design, if not like proper designers themselves. So I know a place in Istanbul, there's a restaurant called Marcus, and the owner has multiple locations and so on. And both him and his wife are very sort of visual, creative people. One of them is a creative director, an artistic director, right, or a film director, I think, or all of it, I guess. So they're with that touch of like, your marketing, your social media, your location design, and over time also evolving the experiential aspect of it is something that designers already have as a reflex, as a muscle. And that's how the business survives, I guess, in the restaurant world, because I do observe that so many designer founders are doing great in the hospitality business.
that's interesting. Yeah, I think you're right in that designers. Well, we see value in the visual communication, right?
Because it has to be like the visual and the sort of the physical location experience, and even the taste of everything. It has to be kind of like an integrated whole that you sort of creative direct in a way.
Totally, it has to be like very cohesive. I think that's something that I push my staff to learn, right? And honestly, our staff, like they have picked that up, and that's why they're partners, right? They have picked up this kind of mode of thinking where it's not just enough to be service oriented, but also to understand that there's a communication that has to do with visuals everywhere, right? And it's not only just servicing, a customer, it's also the lighting, right? How does the lighting feel? What's the music that's playing? Are we always changing it back and forth? Do we stay consistent with a specific mood, a specific feeling? Those things matter so much. And if my staff can't do that, well, I can't be there all the time, right? And so there needs to be like a scale factor to it. And it has to be through art and like design and that cohesiveness.
This is very interesting because, coming from academia, I've spent a lot of time reading and writing and talking about design philosophy, which is sort of a thing that, in academia, that's one of the things that you might do. And then I realized like it's actually an extremely powerful thing in the context of like doing design work professionally to have a design philosophy, because that's what allows your design to scale in a way. Like what is even philosophy? It's to put into words certain ideas, right? If you think things in your head, that's not philosophy. When you speak them out loud, when you write them down, then it becomes a philosophy. And if you can articulate that, you can give that to your staff, you can scale. So you have like the 10 principles of Dieter Rams, and you have, the 10 rules of Virgil Abloh, which he had done like a slide deck where he has that. And that's how you build a massive brand, and you have your entire company, your entire team or organization executing a particular design philosophy. I want to talk about that a little bit. So I really love your design language. I want to talk about it a little bit for the listeners. It's actually all across your personal Instagram, across Safe House, obviously, and Oak and Saint. If people visit those pages on the internet, they will see. But I'll try to describe it. So you seem to have a space in San Antonio. It's both of those locations in the same place, and it's like an industrial building, as you mentioned, but it looks very, in a way, artistic and luxurious also. There's a massive concrete floor, very neutral looking background, and then it's populated with like some very iconic design pieces. I saw the Togo sofa, which is very fashionable these days. Every designer seems to have it in their home. I want one, kind of, but my girlfriend actually doesn't like it.
Oh no.
So we bought another one. Anyway, there's like the chair from Knoll, the steel and leather. You have some custom
Bossily.
furniture. You have Yeah, you have a lot of like very impressive but minimal sort of wood furniture for low constraint. You have the modular sofa from Bellini, I think, the Camaleonda, right?
Yes. Yep.
So I'm a furniture nerd also, so I know sort of I have some of them, not these pieces, but like similar designers I also have in my home. But it's like very nice, very sort of black and white brown. It's very kind of luxurious. Actually, I want to know the philosophy behind this. So if you were to put it in the words rather than describing the space or showing pictures, what is the design philosophy? What is the idea underlying all of this? And what are some of the, if we think of design as a way of sort of influencing humans, what are the feelings and behaviors, the human outcomes that you're trying to motivate with these designs and the visitors?
That's a really good question because I would say my studio, even though there's some overlap with the design aesthetics, right, between my studio and Safe House and even Oaken Saint, I would say they'll bring different value, right? And speaking to Safe House the most because the Safe House space is so modular, depending on what experiences we're doing, the space allows for that kind of modularity, right? Like moving the different furniture, like all the furniture around and stuff. But I would say from like a principle standpoint, when it comes to everything that has to do with like the texture, the color, the size, all of those things, it had to feel like it was not in the way. And it wasn't even though we really enjoy nice elevated aesthetics and like luxurious spaces, it couldn't speak louder than the heart of the community, right? Or the culture that was being built for the core of the community, right? Our members are more important than our furniture, right? Like our core business model, our core like concept, that vision of Safe House is better than the furniture or the space. And so it had to feel that way. And so it's very neutral, of course. It feels like a blank canvas that if you were to have a member that would say has a very colorful personality, let's say, like that needs to stand out more than the furniture. And it does. I think that the furniture, from a visual communication standpoint, like is helpful when it is that kind of neutral base, right? Like Safe House is not louder, right? The Safe House brand is not louder than the culture of the Safe House members, right? Or the soul of Safe House, the Safe House community. And so that was kind of like the whole, principle. And I think that we started that way, and the feedback that we've gotten is that's like very accurate, right, to the space. People really love the space, but it's more so we like just love each other, right? And like the membership aspect is like amazing. There's a lot of unity in the membership model and in the community. And some good examples of this would be that we have like a coffee hour. We have like member experiences, right? And we'll have like members come through and stuff. And we had a couple new members that joined, and we had some ambassadors in the space, and we're all hanging out. And what we call this like a campfire conversation, where everyone essentially sits in the center of the room. And as we were sitting there, something that came up was everyone really felt like if we were all sitting on the floor, it wouldn't matter. Like if the space was completely empty, it almost feels like it could be completely empty. And the value is not in these pieces, right? Even though we love these pieces, like we love design, we love all these pieces, but it has to be, I guess, in the background, right? It has to feel so good. It's so well designed that it's like, oh, that's just the background. And so it's almost an afterthought. And like, of course it's nice, right? Of course it would be nice.
That's fascinating. I was actually imagining, because I looked at the pictures, and it almost seems like a place where I would be very interested to visit and become a member of, because I love like design classics and good design. And it almost seems like a place where it's intentionally designed so I can come and experience good design through these pieces of furniture that you've selected or built, but also the lack of ornamentation. So you don't have a lot of, complex artwork or sculptures or objects or whatever, which you find in coffee shops. They have posters on the wall and little model cars or whatever, so that doesn't exist. And I think that really speaks to the philosophy that you're just talking about.
Yeah, I agree. It's just distractionless, right? Where everything's super intentional. Even now, I'm still shopping for an art piece another art piece I want to hang up, you know. But a lot of the art and even the tables, we made ourselves. Myself and my family as well. My mom, as an artist, she put those large canvases up there and a couple more art pieces, and even the tables too. I mean, the tables. I was looking at Restoration Hardware. I think I found a beautiful stone table, and I think it was going for like 7,000, right? And I thought, I was like, that's just so expensive. And they're like, how can I recreate this? And I actually found a spot here that were selling rocks, right? It was outdoor material. And so I made it myself. It was extremely heavy. It's definitely the heaviest thing that's at Safe House. I definitely had help to put that up, but it's outside of the balcony. And, everyone loves this table. It's something that like we just like put together, right? Because there's a feeling, it was a specific material that I was looking for. And it only costs 175, so much cheaper. And it's like definitely the look we're going for.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I wish I had I never really had the space to build anything serious, so I never like developed that skill. I really envy the people who can build like tables and things like that.
Well, it's quite the creative venture. I mean, you have to like be quite involved. Like this pedestal right here is made with cylinder bricks, and I think that whole thing cost me another like maybe $200 to create the whole thing. Very, very heavy. It's not going anywhere. And I just got this tabletop is a quartz tabletop. And there's a manufacturer here, and they have massive tabletops, and they do like kitchen islands. And they always have pieces, like remnant pieces. And so I went over and he sold me that piece for like $50. I was like, oh, can I take that one? That one looks great. They're always throwing them away, so.
That's my whole idea of design. Like when I was really getting into design, I sort of like discovered that it's a profession and it's something I might be interested in doing. I was watching, like as a teenager, basically, I was watching documentaries about design and trying to understand like how is this done, or is it even something for me? And I remember Mark Newson is one of the most sort of well-known industrial designers of that time, and still he's business partner with Johnny Ive, I think in their new design studio Love From. And there was a documentary where I think it was the BBC who were just chasing him around as he does his things. And all he does literally for like 10 episodes, all this guy is doing is just going to manufacturers. So he goes to the marble quarry and talking to the people taking out the marble and the CNC sort of machine operators. And then he goes to the wood people, and then he goes to the airplane manufacturer talking to the engineers, and then he's going to the watch factory. And so that's all he does. And it was fascinating. I really loved that. I went to school for mechanical engineering after seeing that because it was so fascinating.
That's awesome. Yeah. That whole realm is so hands-on. I wish I would be able to have more around me for that. I think that's also very fascinating. Like going, touching, feeling the material, right?
Yeah. But that also applies even in digital design for me. Like I work on a lot of websites and apps, and I'm coding, and so that's why I have to present myself as an engineer rather than designer, because a lot of designers don't code. So as the person who actually does code, I have to sort of frame it differently. Yeah, hence the design engineer. But I think every designer, any designer of anything, has to be very close to the manufacturing of that thing. So if you're doing digital, you got to be in the code. If you're doing furniture, you got to be in the wood and the quartz tabletops and making friends with the suppliers and everything like that. So I want to do like a little segment of this podcast with you. This is going to be a little premium segment where we get a little hands-on advice from you. It's called the Office Hours, and it's going to be on our website as part of our subscription package for our members. I want to ask you the question of taste and creative direction in this little segment for a few minutes. Taste is sort of a hot topic right now in tech. I don't know if you're reading like the Twitters and the blogs and things like that, but people are talking about, software is a commodity now. Only the most luxurious user experiences are going to sell. They're talking about, taste is eating the Silicon Valley and this and that. So and you're self-taught, right? So how does one learn taste? And I'm asking you specifically because I think you're one of the most tasteful people, like you're very good at displaying your taste and having taste in the projects that you do. So how does one develop taste? Like, where do I go to learn it? Are there books? Is there a school that I can go to? How did you learn to have taste? And then how do I... Yeah, so office hours, we've been talking about taste, we've been talking about monetizing taste as a creative director, which I think a lot of people are interested in these days. As you mentioned, the coffee industry is fascinating because your narrative, your timeline was like instant coffee, Nescafe kind of things, and then Dunkin' Donuts, sort of like these coffee that is available but it's not sort of special, and then Starbucks. It's always moving up market, and then it's like amazing coffee, and then the fifth way was even amazing coffee, and then amazing like service, and it's moving up market. And software in a way is a bit like that. So a lot of people in the software industry and tech are interested in taste and creative direction and these things, and we just spoke about that. I have a few questions that I noted down that I want to ask you, particularly relevant today. Like, so in your resume, you've participated in 2 startups, and you told the story of this in the office hours a little bit. These companies have been acquired, and they produced impressive returns for the founders as well as the employees. I also know, like in my circle among my friends, there's quite a few of them actually working in the tech industry for startups, and they have been doing a similar playbook, so they've had similar success. It's almost like a playbook that you can follow as a designer. You join a tech company, you build wealth in this way, and then maybe you join another tech company or start one yourself. This has been like in the last 10 years or so, people have been using this as a playbook. Looking at the world we live today, in 2024, where the economics is different, the technology is a bit different, now we have AI and all of these things. Do you think the same playbook still works for designers starting out today? Or if you started out today as a designer, would you do things differently and maybe like not even go into tech?
I would do things differently. I would say I probably wouldn't go into tech. Well, not in the aspect that that one has done in the past.
And I also like to add a little perspective. You are still today operating the studio. You're operating All Hands, which does serve tech companies with the design and brand identity and product design and all those disciplines. So you are still in the scene in a way.
Correct. Yeah. I'd like to say that I'm in the scene at like arm's length. And that like I mean, I would say that I was blessed to be a part of, 2 acquisitions. Right. And I think that was very fast paced. I don't know, I guess as a designer, the landscape has changed slightly. But I'm always up for a challenge. Right. And I think that, these days with all the tools that we have, again, I think that the going back to like the love of learning, right? It's, like learn to love these tools, to utilize them, to build these things, and to build successful brands or apps, or filling like these interesting gaps that we see in the world now. And I think with new technology, it also exposes areas that in the market, right, where there's like there's gaps. And as designers, I think there's so many tools. There are so many tools to be able to build things on our own. So it's either the challenge to work for a company, for a startup, let's say. I think my career path really showed. Even at Wisely, I never really built a large design team. I always worked with other. There were moments where we would hire one designer, maybe 2 designers at a time. But for the most part, it was a very sole designer, right? And I was working on the cohesiveness of everything. And I think that speaks to like the more risk that you take, the more potential for reward, right? And so like I wanted more of that stake, right? I was a bit of a design like control freak, and only because I wanted the whole experience to be cohesive,
Did you find in your professional life, like as a sort of a control freak, creative director person, this is a personality. I have the same personality sometimes in some projects. And especially like when I worked in projects at the university, people would be, not everyone appreciates that kind of approach and that kind of personality. Some people like a more sort of collaborative, they want to be like there's supposed to be more democracy in the workspace. Like how would you handle the politics of a company, which I guess might be in your case around 50 people maybe when you were working there, versus the aspect of like, hey, I'm the creative brain of this situation.
That's tough. I would say the politics. My answer to that was I would never get involved in the politics at all. I was very, I would say, non-reactive when it came to politics. And I would say that, in places that I worked, that my first acquisition, I moved over to Life 360. That was probably the largest design team I worked with. And it was the most difficult to work with because I'm someone who I like to change things. I like to I redesigned a portion of their app day one, right? I think it took maybe 2 weeks to like finish out and really like showcase. And once I showcased it, there was a lot of ego involved, right? And I was here to create, right? I don't like to get in front of my designs. I like to like showcase the design, and the work, right? And so, there was just those politics that come into play. I'm just someone who I will never change the way that I design based on how others feel. So there's a way that I just, if my design work is offensive to the politics, I will see myself out very quickly because that just won't work, right? Because if that's the case, it's going to take a long time. And a lot of those designs, I think last year, those design patterns, they started to use some of those assets. Like it took so long, right? But I knew that was going to be that way from the beginning, just because of the structure, right, of communication, the structure of the hierarchy that they had, even from the beginning, right? And like a good example of this was, there was a large design team, and a lot of us were working on and wanting to and had the willingness to work on new things. But there were a lot of like contractors and other agencies that were hired. But we had I think there was like maybe 7 or 8 designers. And so what does that do, of course, with the confidence level, right? For designers to be able to be open and like create new things. Well, it definitely makes it feel just like a 9 to 5 and, versus a place where you can like create and your work will be like accepted. Right. So I think it's important to be in a place where people do accept your work, which is why I think, being a sole designer is always very rewarding because you could come out with garbage and if it's accepted, you'll feel good at least. Right? It's like, maybe you might not learn, which I do think there's an aspect of collaboration, maybe mentorship with other designers. But I think especially with designers, too many cooks in the kitchen is not good. Nobody learns anything, Yeah,
it's really interesting also, going to like design and engineering. I really hate working as a professional designer. In fact, I do it very rarely, very select, clients and projects, but I've done like brand identity design and things like that. But because politics and everybody's opinion has to get involved, and today also the designer in a way in tech and some other fields is perceived as a person whose responsibility is to create the democracy. It's the designer's job in a way to like, you got to hear out everyone. That's how UX designers operate. You got to hear the voices, you got to get the stakeholders involved, and then you create the democracy. And it's not so much your taste or your creative direction or whatever they're looking for. They're looking for someone to consolidate all of those voices into the product.
Totally agree. Yeah, I think that like there's a confidence level and experience that comes with it. Doesn't really matter if others don't like this design. This is what I'm going with. I'm going to narrow it down to this direction. And it's always, to me at least, and I found this out very quickly with Wisely, and I'm very appreciative of the founders, Mike and Tyler, and that they were extremely supportive of my vision. And they hardly questioned my design direction. And that's very big because you could poke holes all day in all of my designs at Wisely. However, it was still very successful because it was cohesive enough still. But there's always going to be problems. Like you could God forbid, like pick out a legend like Dieter Rams, and you could poke holes into his designs all day if you wanted to. But there's a beauty and organicness, right, to the confidence of like, this is what he chose. And that's what, at the end of the day, like that is okay. Like that is design. There isn't someone, there isn't like this design authority, that's saying like that you can't do that, right? Because that's not.
That's fascinating. I think that's like the trade-off actually. Like when you operate as a sole designer, of course there's the trade-off of, if you make the wrong decision and you kill the business or whatever, that's always if you're a bad designer, that's
Well, we'll find out, right?
if you're chasing the wrong designs for whatever reason, it might end in catastrophe. But also like the trade-off is between maintaining the creative vision. So you're one person, we can only cover so much coverage in terms of like quality control and surfaces that you can actually control. Where legends are made, I think, if you look at Dieter Rams, which is, legendary designer, Eames, Virgil Abloh, or a lot of these sort of, we can just name drop designers all day. They are legendary because they have the control, and they also somehow they have managed all the structure of the teams and the humans and the politics around them to create amazing quality control and to scale that vision. And that's awesome. So tell me about, like, coming from this, can you talk about the structure of your ventures today? Like, what does your company look like? How many people are employed? What are they doing? What kind of freelancers, contractors, friends are you bringing in terms of the human organization? What does it look like that you're dealing with today?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess we can start with All Hands. So All Hands, I started in 2017 in Austin. And at the time, I was still working at Wisely. I believe at All Hands, I really tried to break the system. I was working a lot. And I was waking up at 5 a.m. I'd have a nice gym routine, right? I would sit down and like, but I was trying to get to a point where I was able to grow the agency. For the most part, it was very much myself, right? This is very difficult for a designer, again, like you're saying, to scale with, that control, like the quality control, right? And scale. But All Hands has always been very small. And so I've always had very specific projects. I like the larger projects. It wasn't a membership, right? It wasn't like a subscription like we have today. But it was continuous. So in a way, like it was. I mean, it was a monthly, subscription until a client canceled. But when I started it, I learned a lot, right? As I was going through it, a lot of the clients that I had were product UI designers. I think my first experience with doing the freelance like that was in San Francisco, and realizing how much you can make, especially with startups, right? I learned very quickly that you kind of need to go where the money is, like where the funding is. Because, especially for those larger clients, I remember closing a client, my first client, and I was still working at Couple App. I was on salary there, and this was like my first contract. It was for an app. It was this I can't even remember the name, but it was essentially a Chinese ripoff of Facebook. This was like 2015 or something, maybe 13. And I remember going to their office, right? They were local. So I was there. I went to their office, and their office was like decked out. And I mean, like they spent so much money, right? Bean bags, ping pong tables, like everything. And I remember thinking, like, I should do some research on how much they, got funding for this. I think they closed like a round of like 17 million or something. And I was like, this is wild. And I'm like, who's their audience? Like, this has to be fake, But so I go, I just thought about it. I was like, there's like psychology to like, figuring out like, what's my price, right? And this was the first time, and I had never done this before. But I wanted to do a monthly, thing with them. The contract, I think, lasted for maybe 6 months. But I put this contract together, and it comes down to the price. And I go like, what is my price? Like, do I do hourly? Do I do fixed? Like, what is it, right? And I kind of just picked a number that felt good, and I put it very high. I put it at 13K per month. And at the time, 2015, this was like a lot, right? Freelancers, right? We're getting into this like realm of, are you an agency? Are you just a freelancer? Are you charging that much? That seems like a lot. They didn't even blink an eye, right? So I send that to them. They don't blink an eye, and I go, oh, wow, that's crazy. I go, okay, so let me see how I can navigate this. How can I build this and scale it to have maybe another designer that helps me out? Do I have an agency, right? So that's All Hands. So 2017, I'm working at Wisely. I'm still building this out. And it's always been per project. So I like to have relationships with my clients, right? I like to like communicate with them, and like understand their goals, right? And so as I'm doing that, I'm also building relationships with other designers and starting to understand how to design essentially my staff. This was like kind of that intro. So like, how do I get the right people on board for this specific project? Because not all projects and goals are created equally.
Oh, so you're composing little teams for each project, for each of your clients in a way, yeah, with freelancers.
Yeah, and I started to learn that at Wisely as well, with Mike and Tyler, the way that they hired, right? And they learned this very quickly, and I was learning this from how they were building, and that people, it's all people. At the end of the day, it's all people, it's all personalities, it's all characters, it's all skill levels, and so you have to find humans are the interface, right, for that, for specific success for a goal, right? And so finding those designers for all hands. So that was, I was building that. And I think at one point I had maybe 5 clients, which was way too many clients. I was working a lot and I was still working out Wisely. And so that like kind of helped scale all hands, that was 2017. And so, yeah, so all hands has always operated that way. And so to this day, it's still the same,
Do you have like a kind of a Rolodex or phone book of designers where we just sort of, how many people are on that Rolodex?
I would say maybe 6 to 8 designers. It's pretty.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there's designers.
That's not a lot.
No, it's not. Yeah. I mean, I don't think you need that many. I mean, a lot of those designers I've been friends with for a while. And if a project lands on my desk, I'll just hit them up like, hey, what do you think about this project? We kind of go through it. And these projects are bigger,
Going through this process, and I was imagining, I have to have like 20 people on my phone book if I want to do it this way. But 6 to 8 is a manageable number. That's really good.
It's quite manageable, I would say. And it's not like all of them are always working on a project at all hands, right? It's like, there's a project here and there, it comes through. And it's just managing that, or like communication. But I think through the experience of like art, like that creative direction, and putting these, that's a skill set that I think was important to practice and exercise, which is creative direction documents, like how to give someone enough, especially a designer, or like what would you want to have? And those documents are very important because otherwise, as designers, right, we're just staring at a blank screen and we're like, I don't know what this should look like, and it's very
Where
tough,
do you how do you develop those documents? Do you find templates from somewhere, or is it just through like years of experience you just kind of know?
I've like combined the documents, like PRD documents, and like have created my own CD documents, creative direction documents. And so there's a bit of like, there's a short description, right? There's like inspiration links, mood boards, and then there's like specific areas. There might be like content architecture for like a website, let's say. That content architecture is super important because you have like the hero text, you have like, here's a snippet for this, snippet for that. And those documents are just so important because even with that being said, designers, we will, especially with content, right? We'll look at something and go, this is too long. I'm just going to take this paragraph because I think the paragraph shouldn't be that long, right? We'll just like copy paste. But if we have nothing, then we have to create like what, ipsum lorem, then that's not so cool.
Yeah. What about Safehouse and OpenSaint?
Yeah. So then Safehouse and OpenSaint, OpenSaint, of course, and Safehouse they're separate identities. Like business wise, they're separate like LLCs. OpenSaint, there's 2 staff members. I actually started OpenSaint with my family. My youngest sister, my other sister, who is also a barista. She was, when I was in San Francisco, she was a barista here at some local coffee shops in San Antonio. So she already had a lot of barista experience. So that was amazing to have her pretty much open OpenSaint for us. But she has a family now, and so we don't put her to work, too much. And then of course my mom, she does like some health consultations as well in this space, and a lot of members know my family as well. It's a bit of like a slightly like family endeavor as well, right? So I have 2 staff members, And then I have another business partner that is a business partner with Safe House, and he also helps out with OpenSaint as well. His name's Akash. And I actually worked with Akash at Wisely. He was an engineer at Wisely. So we became really good friends. Yeah, we became really good friends because he is also a music producer. And so we kind of connected over music. And I've done some sequencing myself, and we actually created a hip hop album, an R&B hip hop album, yeah, together. So we like connected on that front, and then from there, like we've built, Safe House, and he's helped me out with Safe House a lot. So Safe House is it essentially only has two founders, myself and Akash. Yeah, and so it's very small. Oaken Saint is essentially myself, Christian and Dexter, and Akash that are running it right now. So it's only 4 people. Yeah.
That's really nice. I love small businesses, man. Like there's, I think, a sweet spot between like 5 to 10 people, at a certain level. It becomes sustainable. You're not like your default alive. If we use like the sort of Silicon Valley startup terminology, you're not default dead where you're always having to like move and move to stay alive. It's lovely if you're able to establish that.
I would rather have it small. I would rather have, I've thought about this for a while, but I'd rather slowly build and see cash flow than have an idea, essentially just insert not just like, let's say, funding from others, and then have to repay that, and then you're just kind of fighting with yourself or a board, or I'd rather like it be a slower gradual build, and I see cash flow, right? Like if I make $5, those are $5 that I can keep,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's the 2 different business methodologies, right? So like you might be trying to do something that actually requires that. It cannot be done without scale. Like how do you have a bank, for example? You cannot have a bank that serves 5 people. You need to have thousands of customers, and because you have legal limits of how big should a bank be, and to start that you need huge funding. Some ideas are like that. Some ideas, a coffee house can survive even when it's not built to like scale infinitely to like billions of dollars.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that's why you have like these small like little taco shops back here that are like doing very well, family owned.
That's really cool. Listen, this has been a great conversation. I learned so much from you, and I asked all of these sort of unique questions that I had noted down based on your experience, based on what you do creatively. I have a couple of quick fire questions before we go. Is that all right?
Yeah, let's run it.
So, do you like books? Can you give us some book recommendations as a designer? Books that you recommend to people that you enjoy, that have sort of changed your life or something like that? That's
a great question. I do like books. I would say I don't know if I have a particular book that has necessarily helped me through my design journey, but I love design. I love a lot of visual communication books. So I do like a lot of magazines. But I would say, let's say like there's a book, it's an object book, the New York City Transit Authority, I believe.
The New York City Transit Authority object book.
Yeah. That one's super cool. I think it's books like these that really, inspire me, because it's looking at a lot of old editorial work, right? And I think even with like apps and UI, I'm always looking at editorial versus new. I'm looking at old world stuff, or
What is old editorial? Can you give some examples?
Honestly, it's very type forward. A lot of it is very type forward, type of visual communication.
Is there a particular magazine or book or website where you can like go and see this thing?
I think honestly, if you just type in editorial like type forward, or on, let's say, Cosmos or like Pinterest, you'll definitely get some of this stuff. I even go towards like, let's say, editorial UI, like that stuff. A lot of that comes up as well. Yeah, I would say more so than books, I read mood boards.
Editorial, I think if we think about like what it means in terms of design language, so I think something that's designed to be read, right? You sit down with it and you read it with like attention. It's supposed to be designed so that it maximizes that experience in a way. I love books like that. Like the only books that I buy these days, my bookshelf is full of design books back there, because I only buy books that are well designed. Like the paper, the layout, the typography, the photos, everything has to be really, really nice. Because if it's just like any old book, I can put it on my iPad and I can read it there. I don't need a physical, thing if it's not super nice.
That's how I pick my wine at Oakensint as well. It's all through the label. It has to match the aesthetic of Oakensint.
I do that too. I just go to like the wine shop or beer shop and I buy beers based on the labels, which ends up actually it ends up being a little too expensive. Because like the good labels, they sort of jack up the price when they put a nice clothing on a bottle. What designers do you look up to?
Ooh, that's good. I would say, yeah, I mean, Dieter Rams, of course. Eames is amazing. Johnny Ive, is classic. Um, I think, yeah, a couple others. I mean, I think there's a lot of fashion designers that I look up to right now. I would say the fashion designer of Seventh Stores in London. She's incredible. I would say Cole Buxton is also a great. It's a duo. They're amazing designers too. Yeah, there's quite a few boutique fashion designers that are just really really great. I mean, Virgil Abloh, of course, very inspired by Virgil as well.
Yeah. I realized I was researching designers recently and realized that Virgil Abloh's entire career, where he did basically everything, was only 12 years. So the guy only worked for 12 years and did all of that. And he became like, yeah, director at Louis Vuitton and exhibitions with Vitra and all, and like IKEA work and Nike, of course, and all of that. He just did it in 12 years. And that's fascinating. It's like, I was like, oh, what did I do in 12 years? Because I've been, I'm 36 now. I've been working.
Yeah, it's fascinating when you see how all of that works, because I think it's also like right place, talking to the right people, right place, right time, location. Like there's other aspects of things that you need to, I guess, design in your environment, right? That also help with.
Location is tremendously, I mean, we try to pretend that it doesn't matter with the pandemic and, going remote and everything, but it just matters so much, it's like, and I realized this because I live in Sweden in Gothenburg, which is not a particularly sort of central. I mean, I like living here, but it's not New York or London or Paris or San Francisco, and it does matter. Like if you're there, then even though, because I'm able to work with companies there remotely because I do software, but even in software, which is perfectly doable remote, even in this field, if you are actually there, it's a tremendous advantage for career progress, for actually getting the job. Because if you think from the perspective of the employer, they have an office, they're working there. Why would they not prefer to have the guy who's there already, where literally they already actually have some of the world's best designers in tech are in New York and San Francisco, or these central places, they have the best talent already. So young people, I tell them, if you're really serious about this, you got to go where it's being done.
And go early, I think, because I think the sacrifice is that like kind of work-life balance. When I was in San Francisco, it was very fast-paced, but I didn't really have much of a work-life balance. I hated it. I mean, I have more. It's way more peaceful here, in San Antonio. So
yeah, exactly. And if you really want to make a difference, and if you really want to get good at what you do, like if you really care, working anywhere else other than the place for that thing, which is like if it's furniture design, I would say Copenhagen. If it's fashion, maybe it's Paris or Milan or wherever. If it's tech, it's San Francisco. You're not going to be working less because you love the thing. I guarantee, like you do work. I was working like very hard when I was younger. Then at some point I realized, and I was in Turkey, in Istanbul, which is all right. It's a big city, nice city, but still in Europe, it's just a better developed ecosystem around the particular work that I do, which is digital design. So I came here. Finally, what is a question about design that only you can answer in the world?
oh, what's a question about design that only I can answer? Um, that's so interesting. Uh, a question. So it has to be a question from myself.
It's a question for you. So what do you know that is unique about design that no other designer or anyone has experienced or knows, maybe, or very few people in the world know, that you would be in a great position to answer that question just because of your experience?
Design to me is life, I guess. Like everything really is design. And so it's not necessarily a job. I guess like going full circle, like it doesn't feel like it's a job. It feels like, you know, like I feel like a design, right? Like humans feel like a design, like everything's a design. And so I guess one thing I'll maybe point out in the way that I think as a designer is it was a question that I had a while ago, which was why do humans have the desire to create anything? Why do we want to create things? Why do we wake up wanting to make things or work or like do things, right? And all of that has to do with design. Why do we want to design new things? And I mean, I think it kind of goes back to a question of like, well, perhaps there's a broader goal, there's a broader vision in that, like maybe there's a designer, right? Maybe we were designed, right? Like maybe we were designed. I think this points to a philosophy of does God exist, right? And if he does exist, right, then if he's if maybe he's the ultimate designer and we're designed and then we want to also design, and so I think like whether anyone, believes in God or not, I think that question kind of like that will never, I don't think that'll ever go away. Like humans, that question is just like, why do we wake up and want to like create things? So I guess that for me, it's like, I guess a unique advantage of that like mentality is that desire to continue creating, right? Like I want to design new things for others, right? And that's kind of like giving back. It's like this ecosystem. There's like an ecosystem to design, right? It's not just a point A to point B. It's kind of like it just keeps moving. It's a circle, it keeps going. It's not it doesn't feel linear, right? Like, oh, we made this, we made that. Now we're going to move on and like do something completely different. It's very like repetitive, and so there's that. And then I guess the piece of mindset of like, there's nothing new under the sun, right? Like everything kind of has been done before. It's just what makes it unique is how you put it together. Like there's a fixed set of colors, but how are you going to put those colors together? That is unique to you, right? And so like when you're creating things like fashion is not new, like a hoodie is not new, but like how are you going to put it together, right? I think that perspective, I don't know, it gives you purpose, I guess, like when you're as a designer, right? Versus just design as a job. Like it just feels like it's kind of an extension of who you are.
I don't quite understand how people are able to do jobs with that mentality of like, hey, it's just a job, and then like I design during the day and then I go home and I don't design anymore. And it's like, I don't understand that. Some people I think designers are less like that overall. Most designers that I know are also quite interested in bringing the design mentality into other areas of their life. But for me, it's the only way. And I think that's maybe why we become designers, because we feel this way that we are attracted to this particular profession.
I think that's why, that's why, like, let's say Virgil, it was his identity. Like, it wasn't necessarily like that's what he was doing. Like that's who he was. And to showcase that, he had to kind of, I think, we build kind of our environment around this, like these extensions of who we are, and people recognize that, and then it becomes our identity. And then, and then when we hear it back to us, we're like, oh, you're like, yeah, I designed this to showcase how I really feel inside, right? Like this is a lot of people when I'm like hanging out at Safe House, a lot of like members, will say like, it feels like we're living in your mind, I'm like, you kind of are,
That makes sense. I love that, man. I wish one day I might have a space like you. I'm sort of envying people who operate physical spaces, although I know the challenges and I know it's a very difficult business. That's why I don't get into it.
Yeah, it's super tough, but it's rewarding. It's rewarding when you can like walk in and, experience the space and everything. Yeah.
I have a friend who opened a doner shop, or a kebab shop, as they call it. He used to be an engineer at Volvo. He was doing like VR 3D simulations and engineering, and he just like quit and opened a kebab shop. He's killing it, actually. He's doing very well. Because his product is just so good. Like it's what he really wants to give to the world. and it's so good. I eat it like every week, which is very like I. There are very few restaurants where I literally go and eat there every week, but his place, Little Donut Place, is one of them, and it's amazing. Cool. What is next for you?
What's next? Well, I think what's next is building out Safe House at Oakensent. I think so. For the first time, everything that is being built now is coming from myself and is being sustained by me. And so, of course, I have partners, right, but not very many. I have staff. We're like building the vision, and I think scaling Safe House and Oakensent is kind of the main priority. All Hands will always exist as a design agency, design studio, where I'm able to provide anything from creative direction, product UI design. I think All Hands is very much the thing for All Hands is always the projects that I get are very 0 to 1. I think my skill set lends well for 0 to 1. I think the skill set that I'm exercising for myself is going from 1 to 2, right, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and that's through Safe House and Oakensent. So that's a bit more. There's a lot more weight that I'm carrying with those, but learning so much through it and scaling Safe House. I mean, we have a vision to scale Safe House to Mexico, to maybe Spain. We have our first member actually is from Spain, and member number 1. She'll always be a Safe House member. She would bring a lot of people to Safe House, and it was always a vibe. Like, it was always a great time. So
It's so important. Like those community spaces, I really love. I would totally try to be a member if I lived in your city. I have.
we'd love for you to be a member.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Recently, just a few months ago, I think a new yoga studio opened up in my neighborhood, which is owned by a Canadian couple, and it's just so good. I really love the space. It's a great community. It's a great sort of membership. I really truly feel like I'm a member and I belong in that community. It's really lovely and so important for people like us visitors or people who live in a particular. It's so important to have these spaces. And I could say like you're doing God's work, you're doing, speaking of like design and, God and things like that. You're doing a service to the community and the people of your city, I think, through this location.
Yeah, something that my business partner Akash always talks about is, don't try to bite too much, right? Don't try to like chew too much, bite off more than you can chew. But he says, become the hometown hero first. Like, start there, start there, and then see how it grows. But I think that San Antonio, like the city, is definitely picking it up, and there's a lot of I can't wait for Safe House to influence other cities, right? And that like I haven't really seen this done that well in other cities either. I would say a big inspiration, of course, has been Soho House. I would say they've just expanded so massively. Their spaces are incredible. Their spaces are beautiful. I was a member there for about a year, but I was lacking that the community aspect. It was very difficult to like break through and find that community. Safe House is small enough, right? So that, an example, a beautiful example is that there's so much unity in the community where we will have like ambassadors, right, sitting at Safe House. And if there's a new member that comes in, this has never stopped with Safe House. Everyone will stand up and greet them. And so it feels like a family. It's not like, oh, there's a member over there. You might meet them at some point, like whatever. And that's something that you can't design.
Yeah, that doesn't happen at Soho House. You just walk in and it feels like just another restaurant,
Of course. And so for us, it's very much, again, it's like, of course, we love the beautiful spaces, but what's the core of the community? Because that is really the offering, right? That's the offering. So
super nice to have you here. This was amazing. I hope we get to do it again one day. I learned so much from you. Thank you for this.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.